Welcome to the 8th Annual Accessibility Awareness Days event. I'm Sherry Gagno, Accessibility Manager in the Office of Human Rights, Equity and Accessibility, and the moderator for the event this year. If you require captioning, look for the 3 dots in the menu bar, scroll to the bottom of the drop-down menu, and select Turn on Live Captions. So this is it, the last of 5 workshops for this year's Accessibility Awareness Days event. We have tagged on another 10 minutes from 12 to 12:10 to wrap up this event with our closing ceremony. During this time, we will be making some announcements, including our Indigo gift card winners, along with concluding remarks. You are welcome to stay on the call for this portion of the event. In keeping with previous week's format, today our speaker will present for 20 minutes, leaving time for questions and answers at the end. Please type your questions in the chat box. Our final topic is Inclusion Has to Be Purposeful. I'm thrilled to introduce this year's keynote speaker, Dane. Dave is a former resident of Essex County. He's an internationally recognized leadership coach, enterprise agile leader, and trainer with over 20 years of experience. Dave has worked with many large-scale technology companies and has just concluded his role as Global Enterprise Agile leader at Scotiabank. Next week, he will take on a new position with Microsoft, leading their accessible technology portfolio across the Surface, Windows, and Office platforms. Born in 1971 with cerebral palsy, Dave has overcome many barriers with determination and the support of his parents. Dave has had a tremendous journey that has taken him to where he is today. Dave combines his professional expertise with personal experience to speak to the importance of accessibility and inclusion. It is my pleasure to extend a virtual welcome to the University of Windsor to you, Dave, and I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Sherry. I'm super glad to be here and to speak to the University of Windsor and people that live in Windsor. Like Sherry said, I was born in 1971 with cerebral palsy in Windsor, and at the time, my mom and dad were told David may not live past 12. David may never be able to speak clearly, if at all. Sadly for you today, I can speak quite well. And even if he does, don't expect much because there's not much in the world that somebody with Dave's condition can accomplish or do. And sadly, in 1971, that was true and that was the status quo. So they actually recommended my parents to put me in some institution. But they didn't want to make one decision that was going to impact the rest of my life. Rather, they're not really visionaries, but they had the resilience to go, we don't know what the right path is, but we're going to struggle and figure it out together. And luckily, through the support of my parents and the John McGivney Center, they fought school boards to get me into school, to find schools that were accessible, all the way through, not only to make it possible for me, but really to teach me the struggle and resilience that I would need to do to continue doing this afterwards. So I remember one of the biggest cutting moments was after high school, OAC at the time. And after you complete OAC, you had to choose what you wanted to do. And I was really good in business. I was really good in computer science. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I was kind of like any other student, didn't know what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I remember my dad walking down the stairs going, David, let's be honest. Being in a wheelchair, you're not going to be a fireman, police officer, or construction worker. But you know what else you're not going to be? Living under my roof for free the rest of your life. So you better figure it out. And through there, really, that was the same that every other one of my friends had to face when they were going to school. But what they didn't have to face was whether the school was accessible or not, or whether the classroom was accessible where I could get my chair in. Because I always say I was lucky where I was born in an era before all these rights existed and programs existed. So I got to live and experience the struggle of not having anything up until today, where we're a lot better than what we used to. So even though it was passed just years before to make the classrooms accessible, the use case they never thought of is, what if somebody goes away for university that has special needs. My mom and dad were my primary caregivers all the way up to that point. And when I mean primary caregivers, they would get me up in the morning, shower me, and dress me so I could go to school. So I kind of surprised my parents when I'm like, I want to go away for school. They're like, what? And it wasn't like I wanted to bring mom and dad with me along to college, right? The whole point of going away for school is to experience that independence. But at the first time in my life, we had to embrace vulnerability of the unknown. I was going to interview and really search out for people that we could pay that would help me get up in the morning, shower, and dress me. The reason why I say vulnerability is these people are merely perfect strangers day before. You interview them, and then literally you're completely naked in front of them right away. That is the vulnerability that you have to face to really achieve something you couldn't have. So even though we figured that out and the classrooms were accessible, it was still hard to fit in with the students and to do all the my other peers. So then inclusivity was a hard part. Like they would go, hey, Dave, do you want to go to the quad and play ultimate frisbee? Not so much. So it wasn't like anybody was being explicitly um, blocking. They just didn't know what it was to be able to include somebody of all abilities in normal social things. And this kind of followed me through my first job. So when I graduated university, I had good grades. And when I moved back, I applied for 9 months. Either I didn't get a call back, or I would show up and there was no ramp for me to go into the building to have an interview. Or if I got in there, the office wasn't set up where I could navigate around to have the interview. So a lot of times I didn't know if I didn't get the job because maybe I didn't have the right experience, which I could live with, or is it they weren't ready for somebody like me? And luckily, after 9 months, I landed my first job, and I was super excited. I was going to be a logistics coordinator for a training group where, at that time, there was a lot of paperwork where people would sign up for courses manually, and then I would have to find the logistics of the location of the hotel. Now, my normal peers could do that in 8 hours a day. That took me 12 hours because with my hands, paperwork wasn't best suited for me. But I was lucky where I was one of the first people to get a computer on their desk because I was known as the person that was really good with computers. Because luckily at an early age, I had to use computers to minimize that mismatch of environment. Because what I always think to say is, it's not my cerebral palsy that holds me back. Rather, it's the mismatch of the environment that cannot accommodate my cerebral palsy that holds me back. So technology was that thing that really helped me minimize the gap between what I could physically do and what was possible. So what I did quite, and it wasn't that I didn't mind working 12 hours a day. I grew up from a very hardworking family. The real challenge was my first day, I found out I couldn't fit in a bathroom. My wheelchair could not get in. And I had a choice to make at that moment. I could have either said, hey, I need an accessible bathroom. But because it took me 9 months to find my first job, I was just simply grateful that I was there. So what I did was, instead of telling somebody, I would hold going to the washroom every day for 12 hours for 3 years. I did this in silence. So think about this. I would be very cautious in the water I would drink because I knew I would have to go from 8 in the morning till about 7 or 8 at night without going to the bathroom. But like I said, luckily I got a computer, so on the weekends I developed a website because there was this new internet thing that we thought would last. And I created a website where people could sign up for their own courses and it would automatically point them to the logistics to go there. So what was taking my peers 8 hours a day, I was now getting my work done in 3 hours. The guy in a wheelchair was getting done his work in half the time. I was like, who's disabled now? But that was what I didn't realize was that was the start of my career, where my mismatch in environments gave me an eye to fix it before other people realized it was a problem. Like I work with very smart people as with my peers. They were super smart, but because it wasn't a problem for them, because they could get their work done in the normal time, they didn't think about enhancing it. But because it was a problem for me, because of my diverse way of looking at things, my cognitive diversity became a competitive advantage. So my boss called me in his office. He goes, Dave, everybody loves what you're doing here. How do we use you more in more departments and more functions? Do you need more of these computers? Do you need an office? Because at that time I was in the corner somewhere. What do you need to get things done? And I sat there and said, well, there's one thing you could do for me. You can make the bathroom accessible. And he sat there and he looked at me and he realized in all the 3 years, he never once saw me in the washroom. And at first he said, well, why didn't you tell me? And I explained to him, I didn't feel safe, so I kept it silent. So now as my career has progressed, I've actually moved from Windsor to Waterloo to Toronto to back to Waterloo, where I have to beg for a job. Now I get poached for jobs. But even to this day, I've learned to be inclusive as a manager, to make sure we celebrate the differences versus how we're in common. But even throughout my career, so this is the point of my talk. Inclusion needs to be purposeful. We can't just do it at onboarding. We can't just do it at the beginning. We have to deliberately do it throughout the whole life cycle of a person's journey, whether it's their whole school journey and school experience or their professional career. Because as I moved on, as I got more confidence and I had my voice, I still found myself falling into the trap of not feeling safe to ask for things. So, one of the things I want you to take away as a hiring manager, get to know your person before they start work. Get to know the person before they start class. Don't think about just simply their interaction while they're sharing time with you. Think about their whole journey of how they get somewhere and after they leave to understand that whole experience. You can't expect them to raise a hand when they don't feel safe. You have to make it safe. Share some of the things you need. We all have special needs, just some are more visible than others. Whether you have to pick up childcare, whether you have to eat during certain times. Regardless of what it is, you gotta make it safe. Because we all know cognitive diversity, and this is my thing. Everybody says, Dave, you're a big diversity champion because you're a fan of equality. I am a fan of equality, but I'm not looking to win a humanitarian award. I truly believe cognitive diversity is what's needed to solve really challenging problems. Because if we all think alike, then we're all wrong with the same assumptions and same ideas. So as an organization, we got to move from how do we make that person fit in the box to how does the organization appreciate all the outliers that don't fit in the box that will give them that competitive advantage. So you got to make it safe through the whole life cycle, whether it's onboarding, because I started some companies where they'd be like, welcome, Dave, for onboarding, we're going to do, for a team building event, we're going to do axe tossing. You don't want me throwing an axe. That's not safe for anybody. But if So let me put it to you this way. In the last 20 years, I've worked for companies that I could get in that were accessible. But not every company I worked at, I felt that I belonged there. Just because there's a ramp that will get me in the building doesn't guarantee that I feel that I belong in the building. The belonging always comes to the people. And it doesn't just need to be leaders, it can be peers, it can be people around them that invite that person for lunch, to bring them somewhere, or when there's an event, especially now with those new hipster bars and restaurants where they have the tables way high. When everybody's gathered around there, I'm like, yeah, this is great. I can roll under the table, but I can't really put my drink or sit at the table. So even though they'll make accommodations and put me in the corner, I'm still excluded from those casual conversations that make people bond. So we got to make sure that inclusion just isn't in the place of work or the place of school, but we think about inclusion in everything we do. What can we do to make it good for that person, whether it's a different ability, whether it's some religious views, whether it's a cultural thing? We have to get good at that. Two, I think it's always important to do exercises to really understand what everybody brings to the table and their differences. Because too often in human constraint, we quickly go to what we have in common to bond. I like to have people put what their differences are so we remember to appreciate how we're different as much as how much we're the same. Because that tries to ensure we keep that diverse perspective, right? Because to me, that diverse perspective is the competitive advantage. But again, in order for that diversity to exist, they got to feel safe where they can maintain that diversity and be where they are. So I told you that I fall into this trap over and over again. So as I progressed in my career, the first example I gave you was when I started my first job and I was an individual contributor. I didn't have anybody reporting to me. I just did administrative work. As I progressed in my career and became a manager, a director and stuff, I had to challenge policies because it used to be corporate travel. They wouldn't pay for anybody to go with you. So then I had to have enough courage to go. I would like this promotion, but I have to have my helper travel with me. And then sometimes my boss wouldn't want to have that battle. So they would say, well, just expense it and I'll slide it in and nobody will know. When I worked at one company, I did that. The invoice came and I expensed it. I got payroll to call me and they said, Dave, we don't usually cover this kind of expense. And I'm like, well, my boss said to do it this way. I need to bring this person. What I didn't realize, they put on the invoice escort service and not personal support worker. So that made for an interesting conversation to we aligned it the right way. And then I had another question. You said you usually don't pay for these. Which cases do you do? But that's for another talk. Um, but because we weren't transparent and open, that I needed a helper to travel with me. And I was afraid to ask because I thought that extra cost would have really kind of put me out of contention for the role or promotion. So that's why inclusion has to be in every role and progression. And now, up until Friday, I was a senior global vice president at a bank. And every time the meetings would change at the last minute, and I couldn't always accommodate them because I had to meet my support worker at specific times. So I would just not go to the meeting, which would take my perspective and my expertise out of the conversations. Even though I should know now, being at the very end of my career, that I should be comfortable enough to say, you know what, I have special needs. I still didn't feel safe as a global vice president. Finally, I was missing too many meetings. I emailed my boss and my peers, and I said, I got a request to make. Can we keep the meetings around this time range? Because I can't arrange for my caregiver to be able to be at those times. And not only did my boss understand and go, well, of course, one of my peers emailed me and she said, Dave, thank you. And I'm like, why are you thanking me? She goes, I was struggling getting childcare for my kids every time the meetings would switch to off hours. So what I learned is what makes it inclusive for one can be inclusive for all. And if we truly want diversity, I believe diversity is a lagger of having a safe, inclusive area to work and live in. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave, for your presentation and being vulnerable and sharing your stories, and just you've given us a lot to think about and things that we can take back to the university in whatever position, whether we're students, staff, or faculty. I think there's a lot of things that we can do to enhance not only accessibility but inclusion and that feeling of belonging. So I'm going to open it up for questions. You can go ahead and enter your questions in the chat box. Just so that everyone knows, again, these sessions have been recorded and we will shortly be sending out an email with the links to this presentation and previous ones for those who want to go back and see them. So we did get a comment just about how amazing this presentation is. Thank you, Dave. I certainly agree with that. A question for you. It says, drawing from your university experience, what were some of the things that other students, staff, or faculty did that made your experience better?
When I went to the University of Waterloo, they met with me and they understood that it didn't begin and end at the classroom. They wanted to know what were my living requirements, what were my needs to get from where I was living to class. So they really looked at the whole journey from get up in the morning to going home and studying and doing my homework. So they realized that my disability doesn't just sit with me in the classroom, that I carry it with me all through the day. And they were mindful of making sure they covered all those friction points because nobody knows the pain of waiting for a special bus or waiting for a special cab. That can be on time to 2 hours late, which takes away your ability to do homework if you're stuck waiting for things. So what they did well for me is they understood the whole journey of what it was to be a student, not just my time in the class or submitting assignments.
Great question. Thank you, Dave. So what is the number one thing you wish all accessibility and inclusion allies would do to be supportive? So what's the number one thing that if somebody's an ally for accessibility and inclusion, what's, I think, the biggest piece of advice you'd share?
Simply ask, how can I help? Right? Start that bridge of open conversation. When you see that discriminatory thing, or even if it's explicit, I like it when it's more explicit than when it's kind of under the radar, because you can fix the people that are explicit that are, we're not going to do this or we're not going to make changes. I would say look for those points where there's mismatches of the role of the person to the environment and simply ask, how can I help? Because that's an invitation for somebody to feel safe to go, well, this could help. Like if my boss would have came to me after the first couple weeks and said, hey, how's your first 2 weeks? Is there anything I can do to help you? And not just with the work, with the whole office experience, I might say, I would like to be able to go to the bathroom. It would have extended in a welcome and a safety net for me to jump in.
Okay. Another question has come in and it says, are there specific difficulties you have faced as a result of the pandemic which you can share?
Yeah, the pandemic was really, it was the first time in my life, because I'm married and my wife, but I always have PSWs come into the house. because I want my independence. Kelly is my wife, not my PSW. Of course, she helps me when I travel, because two's company, three's a crowd. But the hardest part is I had to choose to give up my independence to have Kelly do my care versus having PSWs, because at that time, the risk and exposure I would have had to have PSWs could have brought, the virus into the house. So for the first time in my life, I had to balance safety with independence, which is a very difficult trade-off that I don't think a lot of people have to face. And I wouldn't wish that amongst anybody to go, do I want to be safe or independent? And at least after a while, when the healthcare caught up to make sure PSWs only worked at one primary place and not two or three, allowed me to get back to my independence, where it's better for our relationship and my independence. But that was a very difficult thing I had to endure.
Well, if we could flip that question around. So we know that the pandemic caused some specific challenges, but was there anything that was, did you achieve any advantages, or was there any bonuses, or, your ability to work from home during the pandemic?
Besides being an introvert, I love that because then, I didn't have to talk to people. Joking aside, what I really liked about it was it allowed me to do events like this without the logistics to go anywhere. It really got to teach the world what it would be like to live in a remote environment. Because it's funny, I said early on the pandemic, everybody got to learn what it was like to live with a mismatch in environment because everybody was disabled initially until they learned Teams and Zoom and learned to make it accessible to them. Luckily, they've been able to overcome it and move forward. Some of us are still going to, but I think if we didn't get exposed to remote work at the level we did, I might not be working on Microsoft next week because then they didn't worry about, are you going to move to the States because they wanted me to, but healthcare isn't the same. So luckily it allowed me to work where I wanted to. I know my home office is accessible, of course. It takes one anxiety I don't have to worry about what I usually do when I start a job is, can I get into the office and can I go to the bathroom? That should be a right to most people, but to a lot of us, it's a privilege still. And we got to make sure it's table stakes for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, you've given us a lot to think about from a different perspective that a lot of people just take for granted, that it's easy to do these things, but it certainly can be challenging for other people. So I think we have time for one more question. There are a number of students who are listening right now who will become leaders in the workplace. What is your top advice for making more inclusive workplaces? And you shared a little bit about that, but that was a pre-submitted question. Is there anything else that you could add?
Is that from the student's perspective as becoming a new employee in an environment? Or is it what they could do, what leaders could do to make it more inclusive? From the individual, be brave enough to ask. It might seem really uncomfortable to ask, and you might not be willing to share, but you're going to be facing uncomfortableness throughout your whole life. You got to learn to be able to ask for it because I found more times than not, people are willing to accommodate, they just won't initiate. And from leaders, initiate that conversation to go, how do we make the experience of being an employee, the experience of career progression, of changing travel policies and realizing how accessible needs will change and inclusiveness will change as they progress up. Be the first to get in front of it and don't wait for that person to feel brave enough to ask.
Great. Yeah, those are great comments, Dave. So thank you once again for coming and taking part of this year's Accessibility Awareness Days event. I believe I'm not the only one when I say your heartfelt presentation, Pearls of Wisdom, are greatly appreciated. You've given us a lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great. Okay, we are now at 12 o'clock, so we're going to move into the second part of today's presentation. It's just for a few minutes. We're going to be doing our closing ceremonies. Joining me on this portion of this presentation is Kay Johnson, Executive Director of the Office of Human Rights, Equity and Accessibility, who will be providing closing remarks. So to begin, we have been drawing 2 names each week from the list of attendees for a $25 Indigo gift card. I'm happy to announce the winners who attended last week's event are Krista Lawford from Kinesiology and Amanda Kishun from the Faculty of Law. The last set of winners who attended today's event will be notified by email later this week. The next part of this presentation, we will formally announce the winners of the 2021 Innovative Designs for Enhancing Accessibility. For enhancing accessibility. I've lost my spot here, sorry, folks. For enhancing accessibility competition, otherwise known as the IDEA competition. This is an annual event that engages creative minds to develop inclusive, innovative, cost-effective, and practical ideas to solve accessibility-related barriers. This competition was inspired by the AODA, which is intended to reduce barriers and to create an accessible Ontario. So coming in 4th place was a team from engineering who designed a modified vehicle rear door entry for power wheelchair access. The team was comprised of Dinesh Sankar Natarajan, Nikhil Thomas Kutothara, Akash Dineshbhai Patel, and Harsimram Gujral. Congratulations. The 3rd place winner was also from engineering and was inspired by the pandemic. This participant proposed a speech-to-text mask using speech-to-text technology to support those who have a hearing impairment. Congratulations to Ahmed Anwar. The 2nd place winner was a team from the university's VAPE program who designed the Adaptable Accessibility Strategies in the Classroom proposal, which looked at multiple ways to increase accessibility. The team was comprised of Maria Lederer, Logan Gillingham, Alexan Chaisan, Bishmith Kumararsing, and Gabriella Walker. And finally, the 1st place winner is a 3rd-year drama student who proposed the ADHD e-project. This project was designed with a 3-step approach to address attitudinal barriers for students who are neurodiverse and more specifically diagnosed with ADHD. The goal of this project is to destigmatize ADHD and to support acceptance and full inclusion of neurodiverse students. Congratulations to Nadia Gill. Thank you to everyone who took time to develop a proposal and participated in the contest. Several of the winners have agreed to be nominated to the National IDEA competition hosted by Universities Canada and will be cheering our Lancers on. We have no further announcements at this time, so I will turn the presentation over to Kay Johnson, who will close this event with concluding remarks.
Thank you, Sherry, and what a fantastic month of sessions that this has been. Really congratulate everyone. We've just been getting a lot of very good feedback to all the presenters and such. So I'd like to start by thanking the presenters that we've had over this month, and that's Dr. Zhijian Veronka, and along with Isona Siliker, Dr. Laverne Jacobs and Nadia Shivratan, Dr. Veronica Margarotti, Professor Nick Baker, and of course today's keynote speaker, Dave Dane. Also with these, we had a lot of support from and contributions with the Ignite students, so I'd like to recognize the students from the Ignite program that we had, and that's Isona Siliker, Katrina Hermele, Liz Steers, and Sydney Talbot. Also, of course, these things, we have a committee behind that, and I'd like to thank some of the other people that were on the committee, and that would be for the Accessibility Awareness Days Committee, Anthony Gomez, Jocelyn Laredo, Karen Pilon, and of course, Sherry as well. So, and I'd also like to thank Public Affairs and the Communications team for the outstanding job that they've done in the live events. So those who've been able to join throughout, this is quite phenomenal. And, you know, they really show some of the things that can be done with technology today and some of the things that we hadn't thought about in terms of as even possibilities and such. And their willingness to try different things to try and make these sessions come alive and such. And also thank you, Sherry, for the excellent job that you've done leading this initiative with such creative and welcoming ways. We appreciate the tremendous amount of work that is required to make this a success that it has been. So thank you to everyone who's joined us this year to our first virtual Accessibility Awareness Days event. So COVID has brought many changes to our world and challenged us to be creative and to connect in new ways. So while it has presented some challenges, it's also provided some opportunities for access that might not have been there in some of the traditional ways that that these sessions and such have been operating. It is encouraging to know how many people participated in the event, and very impressive. And also that, you know, we hope that this year was wonderful, and we hope that you continue to work together in making our campus and our greater communities more accessible, diverse, and inclusive. So once again, thank you so much for making these days a success, and we look forward to our continuing work together.